What's up you guys, hope you're having an awesome day. I'm your host Ayman Hassan and welcome back to another video. Now I could talk about the Titanic for forever and I feel like people will just never get sick of hearing about it. It was such a huge tragic event that took everyone by storm, and to be honest, we just haven't gotten over it. Our hearts clearly will not go on, and they haven't. And with that brilliant joke executed perfectly, these are the top 10 scary facts about the Titanic. Starting us off at number 10 are the NAVRATIL brothers, aka the Titanic orphans. This one is equally sad and equally scandalous. Michelle Jr. and Edmund NAVRATIL were going through a rough time for any 3 and 2-year-olds. Their parents separated in 1912 and their mum Marcel had full custody of them but would let their dad Michel see them on weekends. When she went to pick up the boys after Easter weekend, she found the house empty and the boys nowhere to be found. What happened was that Michel kidnapped the boys and boarded the Titanic, wanting to immigrate to the US and start a new chapter with his kids and genuinely hoping his ex-wife would follow. I mean, if you want your ex-wife to follow, I feel like kidnapping is not the best start. The three came on as second-class passengers with fake names, Michel as Lewis M. Hoffman and the boys as Lola and Momin. When the ship was going down, Michel put his kids in collapsible boat D and sadly did not survive himself. Since the boys were young and spoke no English whatsoever, they couldn't identify themselves either and were dubbed the Titanic orphans until their mother was finally located. They were the only children that survived the Titanic that were rescued without a parent or guardian present. Can you just imagine the trauma they went through that they will pretty much never get over? That's a lifelong trauma. Coming in at number 9 is the wealth gap. There were 3 classes of passengers aboard the ship, as we already know. First class to third, the richest are in first class and vice versa. The Titanic did a brilliant job of at least making the third class passengers feel more privileged by giving them closed off private rooms as opposed to a dormitory type situation, but the same can't be said about rescue crews who were doing damage control on the ship. In order to prioritize the remains of the first and second class passengers, they literally just started throwing the bodies of third class passengers into the ocean. The evidence was written in excruciating detail in a series of telegrams between the White Star Line and the recovery ship tasked with the issue. So while most of the second and first class passengers' bodies were returned to their families and were given proper burials, most of the third class families were kept in the dark about their loved ones. Plot twist, the wage gap didn't get any better. 100 years later. Spit facts only. At number 8 we have ignored. So the death count of the crash was estimated to be between 1,500 to 1,635 people out of the 2,224 people on board altogether. And most of them died of hypothermia after the sinking while they were waiting in vain to be rescued from the freezing water. But the casualties could have been so much lower because 20 miles away, the SS Californian was floating idle waiting for the ice to clear. I bet they wanted to be them right about then. The captain of the ship even saw all of Titanic's crisis flares but ignored them because he assumed they were just simply company rockets. Bruh, I would have come back from the dead just to be like, bro, what the F are you doing, bro? We're out here dying. All the SOS signals weren't received till the next day, so by the time the Californian dragged its there, they found nothing but bodies. Too little, too late. Filling our number 7 slot are the tears. Now the commonly believed fact is that the iceberg essentially caused the Titanic to split in half. We saw it in the movie, we saw people sliding to the other side of the ship. It was all happening, and we saw it. Now before actually discovering the wreckage of the ship, experts believed there was only one 300-foot tear in the middle of the ship. Plot twist, it wasn't. But after examining the wreckage, it was a whole other ballgame. There were actually 6 separate tears going through the ship, all totaling 15 feet. But I mean, I had no idea that was a big enough hole to sink a ship that was almost 900 feet long. Almost 882. Nearly there. Now at number 6 is the trusted captain. The captain of the Titanic was Edward Smith, and he obviously caught a lot of slack for being the captain of the ship that endured the worst maritime tragedy ever, but in reality he wasn't that bad. Smith was one of the most seasoned sea captains out there, so much so he even had fans and a low-key cult following. Some passengers wouldn't even go on Atlantic voyages unless Smith was the captain of the vessel. So for a captain with that kind of reputation to then go down in history for his folly on the night of the crash is just crazy to me, like mind blown. Coming in at number 5 is the full moon. Now when it comes down to blame, we can blame the lookouts for not doing their job properly, we can blame lack of visibility, but scientists believe the real blame for the tragedy is the moon. Wind causes waves for the most part, but it's the gravitational pull of the sun and moon on Earth that causes proper tidal waves. So based on that, researchers have concluded that the full moon on the 4th of January 1912 could have caused the abnormally strong tides that moved the big iceberg southward right in time to hit the Titanic on her maiden voyage. That was the closest lunar approach the Earth had experienced since the year 796, so I feel like they ain't wrong. They ain't wrong. At number 4 is the Premonition. So 14 years prior to Titanic's maiden voyage, the author Morgan Robertson wrote a novella called Futility, and its subject matter was a sinking ship. That ship was called the Titan, and the whole story had eerily similar details to the Titanic. In Futility, Titan is the largest ship of its time, and so was the Titanic. In reality, they were both roughly the same size, the Titanic being 25 meters longer, and both were described as unsinkable, and both hit an iceberg mid-April. Both ships even carried the bare legal minimum number of lifeboats aboard despite having a ton of passengers. I mean, even the names of both ships are 2 letters off. Like, are we just gonna ignore that? I don't think we should. Morgan was accused of being psychic, but he replied saying, "I know what I'm writing about, that's all." He was an experienced seaman, he knew his subject matter well, and that's all it was. And although I believe Morgan, it's still just very creepy. Filling on number 3 slot is Till Death Do Us Part. Now amongst the many important passengers aboard the ship, 2 of them were Isidore and Ida Strauss, the magnates of Macy's, the department store. As the ship started going down, the attendants were rushing Ida into a lifeboat, but she flat out refused to leave Isidore behind, and Isidore himself refused to leave on a lifeboat and leave any men behind on the ship. So the couple decided to sacrifice themselves and go down together. The last thing she was heard saying was, "I will not be separated from my husband. As we have lived, so will we die together." And the last time they were seen was on the deck, arms wrapped around each other in that last embrace. Now that is a real ride or die right there. All your other ride or dies? Fake. Cancel it. Done. It's them two. Name a better duo. I'll wait. Now at number 2 is the fatal turn. So I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty of what happened and who was contacted when the iceberg was spotted, because I feel like we've talked about that part of it to death. Now let me set the scene. When the chief officer on the bridge received that iceberg warning, the first thing he did was tell the helmsman to turn the wheel, and that was the biggest mistake he could have made. Researchers who've studied the ship's trajectory have concluded that the collision could have been completely avoided had the order to turn not been made. The Titanic was actually equipped with collision bulkheads in the bow, so had the ship hit the iceberg head on, it would have most likely survived. The damages that would have incurred from the head on impact would have either slowed down the sinking considerably, giving people more time to board lifeboats, or it would have saved the ship entirely. That guy was probably like, "I made a grave mistake." And that you have. And finally, at number 1 is The Show Must Go On. This was just so heartbreaking to me, but I felt like I just had to share it with you guys. I'm sorry if it's a downer. So Dorothy Gibson, a well-known actress of the time, was actually aboard the Titanic and experienced a terrible tragedy for herself. She thankfully survived the incident, but her producers were hounding her to star in a film about the sinking of the Titanic weeks after the crash happened. Like, can we take a moment? Can we take a moment? Dorothy refused to star in Saved from the Titanic countless times, but she kept being pressurized into it because producers were convinced that the film would do amazing. The whole thing was shot in a week, with Dorothy having multiple breakdowns during filming and having fits of hysterical crying. When it was finally released less than a month after the real event, it did horribly. It bombed. Critics thought it was so insensitive that someone would make a movie about one of the worst maritime tragedies not even a month after it happened. And the fact that Gibson somehow survived filming it was also beyond them. They took too soon to a whole other level. That is way too soon. And that's it for today's video, guys. Honestly, that was so much to take in. I was like, give me a hot minute. Let me know in the comments below if you guys had heard any of these facts before, as I'd love to know. As always, I'm your host, Eamon Hassan, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye. Going through okay, Chris is like, I agree.
That's not the experience, Seaman.
The fatal turn that my life took.